Good morning, KNES 310. Got my little orange bird here. He's giving me those eyes. He's like, it's too early for this, man. All right, so we're in the home stretch. Let's see, where do I want to start? So the test next Wednesday is going to be, and I'll send an email out just in case you need it in writing. But the test next week is going to be given at regular class hours. So you got to set your alarm, get up 7:30 to 8:20 next Wednesday. And the key thing with this test is that it won't be, the questions won't be in you got to get up and figure out kind of manner, because I can't be there to clarify things. So in other words, I won't be like, you're standing in anatomical and you rotate on your right hip 90 degrees and then you look to your left and then you pick up a frying pan, and it can't be like that. Hey, Two-Face. All right, buddy. So it's going to be much more heavily on just straight up content knowledge. What classification is the ankle joint? How many motions does the wrist joint allow for? How many different motions were you given for the scapula? What's the opposite of internal rotation? When we flex our knee, what motions can the knee do? What classification of joint was the shoulder? And then a heavy dose of equation concept questions. So if the elbow flexors are working concentrically, what motion would you observe? If you observe elbow extension and a muscle group is working eccentrically, what muscle group must be working? Like those kind of questions. Or you're doing jumping jacks, as many as possible. What's without colliding at the top or the bottom? Where would the plyometric sequence of the abductors be? Hey, buddy, don't bite. Where would the plyometric sequence of the adductors be? That kind of stuff, all right? Hey, buddy. So, so content stuff. Now, today I'm gonna wrap up muscle work, and I'm gonna talk to you about stretching. Okay, so last lecture I talked to you about if I need to go faster than gravity. I'm going to give you a couple more examples of that. Let's say I had a hammer. Let's pretend this is a hammer, and I needed to hammer in a nail. So gravity wants to extend my elbow, right? But if I let gravity do all the work, I'm not going to hit the nail into the wood. And if my flexors did the work, the extension would go slower than gravity, right? So it makes sense that if gravity is trying to extend me, I need to use my extensors to make the hammer go faster than what gravity can offer, okay? Now, what speeds up must slow down. My elbow extensors working concentrically is going to speed up my elbow extension faster than gravity. But if the hammer actually collides with the nail, then that collision is going to slow down the extension. In other words, I don't need muscles to do it. But what if at the last possible second I decide to not strike the nail with the hammer? So if I speed up the extension and then decide, oh, it's in the wrong place, it's the wrong hammer, and I need to put on the brake, I need to stop the extension. What could do it? Put on the brake, elbow flexors through eccentric work. Elbow flexors slowing down the elbow extension, eccentric work. Okay, so that's how that works. Then what if there is no external force? So this should be pretty simple. I give this one last because it should be the simplest. So in the absence of an external force, remember muscles can only pull. So if there's no external force trying to make you do anything, then you have to speed up motion with concentric work, and you're going to slow down motion with eccentric work. Okay? So in other words, if there's no external force trying to flex or extend my elbow in the transverse plane, in the room's transverse plane, it's the elbow sagittal. Hey, buddy. If I need to flex my elbow and there's nothing trying to flex it, I got to shorten while trying to shorten. Now, the same muscles that sped me up can't push me to a stop. So when it comes time to slowing down the flexion, I'm going to turn off these and I'm going to turn off these. I'm going to turn on the extensors. And then if I need to speed up extension, it's going to be extensors concentric, slow down, flexors eccentric. Speed up, slow down, speed up, slow down. So if you do like this real fast, that's just a sequence of flexors and extensors doing plyometric sequences. Same thing for here. If you do this fast, horizontal adductors are going to speed you up. Horizontal adductor is going to slow you down. Horizontal adductor is going to speed you up. Horizontal abductor is going to speed you up. Horizontal adductor is going to slow you down. Horizontal adductor is going to speed you up. Horizontal abductor is going to slow you down. Horizontal abductor is going to speed you up. Horizontal adductor is going to slow you down. Horizontal adductor is going to speed you up. So that's how that works. Now, is it possible to have a constant speed of a joint motion when there's no external force? Yes. One of two things. One is after you speed it up, your momentum will just keep it going at the same speed. Or you can have co-contraction where it takes more force to speed it up, but then all you got to do is tie the ones that are trying to slow it down to keep it going at the same speed. And then when it comes time to slow down the motion, these guys will turn off and then the other guys will slow it down. Okay. So the key thing there is in the absence of an external force, concentric work is going to speed you up, eccentric work is going to slow you down of an antagonistic muscle. So an agonistic group is going to speed you up. Its antagonist, the other one that pulls in the other direction, is going to slow you down. That muscle can then, after it changes your direction, speed you up, and then its antagonist now is going to slow you down. Okay. All right, let's get to stretching. So in your book, in page, let's see, in the 870s, there you go. So I have an article about stretching. I need to keep this into perspective. So some of you are going to have classes where they say stretching is bad or contraindicated. But we have to remember that anyone who says that, it's not that they're wrong, they're just giving research for a very specific, not population, but task. Meaning that muscles, remember from the beginning of the lecture, beginning of the semester, muscles have elasticity as part of the components that pull. So they have the contractile components and they have the stretchy stuff. And the stretchy stuff is kind of like this rubber band where it only pulls more if you lengthen it. It's inert, just like rubber. So in other words, if I zap it with electricity, the rubber band's not going to pull more. But our contractile components are not made of rubber bands. They're made of the little actin myosin stuff. So when you zap it with electricity, it pulls more. So it responds to electrical stimulation. The stretchy components of the muscle doesn't. So when you hear KNES professors, instructors talk about stretching is bad, they're only applying it to athletic type instances where if you're going to try to jump as high as you can, if you're going to do a max effort, if you're going to do a max bench press, if you're going to do a max squat, if you're going to, right before you do a long jump, and you take the muscle and you stretch out the stretchy stuff, then you lose some of the stored elastic potential energy of that stretchy stuff. So if I'm about to do a max bench press and I just stretch my muscles a ton, loosen it up, You know how when you play with silly putty, as you play with it, it gets warmer and looser and it loses some of its stiffness? Okay, very similar. Now, I say unfortunately, we have to remember that not all of the populations we're going to be working with are going to be athletes. In fact, a majority of you are going to be working with old people, older people, and one of the things that you're going to be helping people with is their range of motion. And when they have that are real tight, it can change their posture. It can change their gait mechanics. So tight muscles need to be loosened up. Spasm muscles need to be loosened up. So stretching is not bad for function, because who cares if I stretch a muscle and the research says it's going to pull less? Sometimes I need it to pull less. It doesn't spasm as much. Or to restore normal range of motion, we have to stretch certain muscles. So stretching is not bad for a majority of normal population who you're just trying to restore function. You're just trying to get range of motion back. So contraindicated for max physical effort stuff, but indicated with people with lack of range of motion, muscle spasm, that kind of stuff. So here's how it works. Muscles, and this should be super duper simple, and this is all in your book, guys. So I'm just kind of looking at the pages, late 70s, early 80s. Okay. So basically the concept is, and I have ACSM's, American College of Sports Medicine guidelines. So basically, remember, muscles can only pull, and muscles pull in directions of motion. So the concept is, if I have a muscle that's an elbow flexor, pulls in the direction of elbow flexion, it should make sense that if I extend my elbow, regardless of who did it, doesn't matter. If I have a muscle that pulls in the direction of elbow flexion, that muscle is going to get longer as I extend my elbow, and the muscle is going to get shorter as I flex the elbow. Now, stretching should infer that the muscle is being lengthened. It's lengthening, right? So if I'm going to want to lengthen an elbow flexor, it makes sense that I need to extend my elbow. If I'm trying to lengthen an elbow extensor, I need to flex my elbow. If I'm trying to lengthen left lateral cervical benders, muscles that pull to the left, I need to bend my neck to the right. Okay. See how it stretches? Cervical flexors, I need to extend. So these kind of questions on the test should be super easy for you to answer. Whatever group of muscles I give you that pull in a certain direction, motion in the opposite direction of their pull is going to lengthen that muscle. So you think about stretching the hamstrings at the hip. The hamstrings are hip extensors at the hip. Semimembranosus, semitendinosus, biceps femoris, long head. If they are hip extensors, let's say here's the hip, and let's say this is hip flexion, this is hip extension. If these muscles are hip extensors, let's try to see if I can figure that out. Then flexing the hip is going to stretch those muscles, and extending the hip is going to shorten those muscles. So that's why when you flex your hip, you feel that stretch in the back, because they are being lengthened as you have motion in the opposite direction of their pull. So these kind of questions on the test are going to be extremely straightforward. If I want to stretch a hip flexor, I need to extend the hip. If I want to stretch a left lateral trunk bender, I need to bend the trunk to the right. If I want to stretch a right transverse cervical rotator, I need to twist my cervical vertebra to the left. I need to have left transverse cervical rotation to stretch something that pulls the other way. So those questions are going to be extremely straightforward. Okay. Now, let me clarify when a muscle is stretching, when a muscle is working. So recall that contraction is trying to shorten above resting tone, so the muscle's doing a job. When you're stretching someone, especially static, and by the way, I think the research is like, look, it doesn't matter. Static, dynamic is like you actually constantly move it around. Motion is life, and if you do dynamic stretching movement, that's better than nothing. So static, dynamic, it doesn't matter. Just move. Get to the extreme ranges of motion and move. But the point is that if you're doing static stretch, and you say, well, one group of muscles, let's say I want to stretch my wrist extensors. So the flexors are shortening and the extensors are lengthening. Okay. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're working. So in other words, if someone is stretching me, they are the ones responsible for the motion, not my muscles. In fact, when someone's stretching you, usually they're using these words like relax, relax, just relax, relax, relax. In other words, don't innervate the muscle. Turn the muscle off. Okay. So my point is that just because a group of muscles is shortening doesn't mean they're working concentrically. And just because a group of muscles is lengthening doesn't mean they're working eccentrically. It's only working when they're doing a job. And you think about when someone's stretching your hamstrings, you're trying to be like, hey, extensors, I know you're kind of freaking out right now, and you want to do a job to bring you back to anatomical because you're not comfortable in this extreme position, but relax, relax. Okay. So, so that's that. All right. So let's get into for the rest of this. So that's it. That's all the information you're going to be accountable for. So now we can get into more of what you need to prepare for the test, okay? So like I said earlier, your test is going to be very straightforward questions from everything after the first test up until now. The bones that make up these joints, classification of bones, classification of joints, how many planes can a hinge joint move in? How many motions do we need to account for a hinge joint? Ball and sockets and pivots, and so all of that stuff you got to know, but know it for what it is. The numbers and the concepts. The radial ulna joint is a what classification of joint? How many different motions can the radial ulnar joint have from its perspective? What's the opposite of pronation? That kind of stuff. And then when we get into muscles, obviously understand contractions. What's the difference between concentric, eccentric, as defined in the class? So my point is that I know I can't police cheating, but I can ensure that we use the verbiage that we use in this class. So that way, if you're Googling something, they probably won't use the same verbiage as we use. So that's going to be important, is to use our verbiage. Okay. So the equation, understanding the equations of concept, the equational concepts of how muscles work. Flexors, flexion, flexors, extension. Who's working greater? Remember that when you have eccentric slowing down, the muscles are working greater. When you have concentric speeding up, muscles working greater. When you have concentric slowing down, that's the muscles letting an external force be greater. And when you have eccentric speeding up, that's the muscles letting an external force be greater. And remember that if you have a constant speed, that the muscles and the external force are in a tie. They have to be in order to keep it going at the same speed. I use the example of moving furniture a lot, where the hardest thing is getting the furniture going, but it's not as hard to keep it going. because you don't have to keep being greater than the friction from the ground. All you got to do is tie it to keep it going the same. Okay. So what I'm thinking about doing is having a Facebook live chat with you guys for Friday's class. I'll do it at 7:30. So in other words, I'll go live at regular class time. I will not answer questions like, will this be on the test? Will that be on the test? Everything is going to be on the test, potentially. What this is about is clarification of content. In fact, you better come with, hey, on this lecture, you said this. Could you please clarify that? Those kind of questions. I will not answer things like, is this going to be on? Is that going to be on? Because I haven't written the test yet. I don't know what's going to be on. I could say, can it be on? And pretty much every answer to that is, yeah, it can be on. So come with specific clarifications, please. Specific clarifications of content, things you want to talk about. If you have examples you want me to talk about, bring that. So in other words, don't say, can you come up with an example? I've done that over and over and over again. This is me trying to get you ready, okay? And the best way for me to get you ready is to say, you guys come up with a scenario or example, and let's talk about your scenario or example. Okay. In the comments, let's go with 10-4. 10-4. I'm running out of ideas. Okay, so come prepared with clarification questions about specific content in the lectures, and we'll see you Friday.